Hey everybody, welcome to Skarey Movies. This week we're going to take a look at the Buffalo Bills' third quarter woes. And no, this is not about scoring or any sort of defensive statistic. This is going to be about penalty trends. If you're checking out all of the great content on BuffaloRumblings.com, which you really ought to be, you may have noticed this article I wrote regarding the penalty trends for the 2022 Buffalo Bills squad. We wrote down the usual stats, some of the ones that only I'm doing, penalties by type, and you might notice the GIF software did remove the ads, so no free advertising via this video. I broke down penalties by phase, and for the first time this year, I decided to take a look at penalties by quarter. And that's where today's journey is going to begin. Once in a while, you see something that really just sticks with you. And in particular, you notice I called out this third quarter data. In every metric that I calculated, the Buffalo Bills appeared to have a third quarter problem when it came to penalties. That wasn't something I could let go. So I went over to my friend NFLpenalties.com and I decided to take a look to see what's normal. Now, in a completely random distribution, what you would expect to see is that these numbers would hover around this 786 penalties per quarter. And again, this is a yearly total and 600 or 6,460 yards. Now, this is basically ignoring the overtime numbers because they are so small. And really just the idea here is what you'd expect in a random distribution is each quarter would have about 25% of the total. And you can see league-wide, there is a bit of an anomaly in that the first quarter does seem to have a reduced number of penalties, but overall quarters 2, 3, and 4 are performing about as expected, hovering right around that 25% range. You might have noticed some of that blank spot to the right of the chart. That's all the stats that only I'm going to do. But let's take a look at the same idea with the Buffalo Bills 2022 data. And let's come back to our Q3 data. Again, ideally, what you'd be taking a look at is everything hovering around 25-ish%. And some of these spikes are pretty dramatic. 40% for yards affected. That's a huge number of yards either negated during an offensive play, maybe a sack negated on a defensive one. But again, a large chunk of the yards that are impacted for the Buffalo Bills in 2022, beyond the assessed yardage that we see here, really were related to the third quarter. And down here, feel free to pause the video, take a look at some of these extra stats. We do have what would be the even distribution numbers for those. Now, interestingly, the Bills' first quarter is pretty well in line with the league data. There's a slight reduction there. Quarters 2 and 4 are roughly equal. Again, very similar to league data. Again, suggesting that this third quarter really is a problem. I wasn't going to stop there, though. So let's take a look at this. I wanted to see if there was anything we could find within the penalty types that stood out. You see a lot of these sections are grayed out. These are typically penalties that don't have enough data to really support any in-depth trend analysis. But starting at the top, let's take a look at things. With our false start penalty, I'm using some shorthand for a lot of these. Any question on what any of these shorthands mean, just ask in the comments. I'm happy to help you out there. But taking a look at false start, we have 18 total, 4, 5, 5, 4 spread out across the 4 quarters. That's almost perfectly distributed. That's exactly what you'd be looking at. Now for defensive holding, things get a little bit interesting. 2, 6, 3, 4. So this is actually bucking the trend we just saw a couple slides ago, where quarter 2 is the problem. Now we do see a little bit of elevation perhaps in quarter 4, but it's hard to ferret out from 3 and 1. Now what we're seeing here potentially, it's hard for me to do a causal analysis on this, but at the end of the halves, you are getting some deeper passes, some shots towards the end where things are getting maybe either more desperate or running out of time. So this does seem to make some sense, but it is interesting that it's more of the second quarter rather than the fourth. On our next white band, we have defensive pass interference, and this one just blew my mind when I saw it. You have 0 first half calls for this for the Buffalo Bills all season. 16 regular season games, 2 postseason games, not a single defensive pass interference in the first half. Now remember that pesky third quarter. Out of the 9 total that we see, 6 of them, 66% of the yearly total were in the third quarter. That's just incredible. Completely bucking what you'd expect from the odds. Offensive holding, which is our number one penalty, for the year and for most years, we see 5, 8, 15, and 3. So not only do we see this dramatic spike in the third quarter, but then it dies down towards the end of the game at the fourth quarter. Again, just remarkable data, completely bucking what you'd expect out of this. For offsides, this again is the opposite. We have 4, 3, 1, 5. So for some reason, the defense is more steady when it comes to that. You do see neutral zone, which is a similar penalty, might balance things out a little bit. But again, this is kind of bucking what we were seeing from the Buffalo Bills as a problem. And then just another weird one, unnecessary roughness, 6 for the year, 4 of them in the fourth quarter. So, maybe end of the game, frustrations boiling over, what have you. Again, I can't speak with certainty on what's causing these, but interesting that 4 of the 6, again, 66%, are in the fourth quarter. We're not quite done. I can't do league data for some of these things, but I can do Buffalo's opponents. And that's what we're going to take a look at here. And we're going to take a look at the distribution with some of the same penalties just to see if any of these trends hold up with the opponents or if they're really a Buffalo Bills thing. And again, starting with false start, we see 7, 7, 3, 6. So while Buffalo is pretty evenly distributed, we do see a kind of dip in the third quarter for their opponents. Now for defensive holding, this one's really intriguing to me. This was one that we saw really was a Q2 problem for the Buffalo Bills, and that actually holds up for their opponents too, suggesting that there might be something more about the end of the first half that is inclined to get these defensive holding penalties. So again, you'd expect 2-minute warnings in both of these quarters, that maybe you get some desperation plays that would lead to defensive holding, but perhaps the refs are just trying not to call it at the end of a game. Again, I'm taking some guesses here, but interesting data regardless. Defensive pass interference, pretty even distribution. So again, different than what we saw with the Bills. We see offensive holding, pretty stable. Q4 has a little bit of a dip, but nothing to suggest that there's any massive trend here. And then these also have a pretty good amount of data, and you see relatively even distributions there. So what are the main takeaways that I took from all this data? One, the Buffalo Bills did have a massive Q3 penalty problem, and specifically with defensive pass interference and offensive holding. I mean, just yikes. I don't know what adjustments they're doing in halftime, but apparently they were not helping when it came to this. So that's all I got for today. Hopefully making you think about a couple things. Feel free to like, subscribe, call me an idiot in the comments, whatever suits your fancy. I'll see you next time.